The last few days have been sheer drama surrounding Helldivers 2, and yesterday was no different when Arrowhead's former CEO Johan Pilestedt took to the Unfiltered Reddit for an informal Q&A session. Now, fellas, what was said here has done nothing but cause more confusion and questions about the long-term future of this game. Of course, I've got it all broken down for you with my thoughts along the way, so stay tuned for it all. Please hit subscribe to support the channel, and now let's dive in and check out what the hell just happened. As you might have already heard, Arrowhead's former CEO, now turned Chief Creative Officer Johan Pilestedt, took to the Unfiltered Reddit with an AMA post, and for anyone out there that doesn't know what AMA stands for, it's Ask Me Anything. Prefacing his post by saying, "Hey everyone, feels like there's so much hate, misinformation, and disappointment here. I understand you want Helldivers to be great, and you feel we fall short. So my thinking is, let me hear your thoughts, questions, and concerns. I may not be able to answer all your questions, but I'll try my best." Now, full transparency here, I've read through many of these, or at least the ones that Johan has responded to so far, and for anyone out there that is interested in Helldivers 2 really taking that next step to deeper progression systems, more player engagement and agency, and many of the items that we, the players, have been asking for or wanting adjustments to for years, there's absolutely nothing here to build any confidence that those will ever happen. In fact, based on Johan's responses and from some of their recent in-game changes we saw them unveil this week, things seem to be getting worse for HD2 at a seriously rapid pace. Plus, I've got to say, many of the responses tend to be uninformed and or kind of tone deaf. What am I talking about? Well, let's take a look at a few of these. The first of these, and by the way, I'm going to paraphrase the question a little bit, asks if Arrowhead has any plans to expand on progression systems. You see progression systems mentioned a lot in these questions. Also mentioning the still half-finished weapon customization system, and then also asking about an in-game economy, such as a method of spending samples since we are presently limited to what we can do with the DSS. Where this entire AMA crossed the line into, oh my God, we are in serious trouble land, was here. Question number one, and also on this very first response Johan gives. And I want to let you know there's 4 WTF shocking takes buried in here that I'll come back to once we take a look at his response. Here's what he says. There are multiple plans and discussions about improving the existing systems such as progression, weapon customization, DSS, etc. Unfortunately, we have been pushing hard to meet what we see as the expectation on content for each new big update, which unfortunately means that the team is forced to down prioritize what we already have in favor of novelty. Example to this is the critique we received from Cyberstan, where 3 new enemies and a new faction wasn't enough. I think we could do better at looking at improving systems for those of you that are super experienced, but it is a smaller percentage of users than those that are still retained by the mid-game. I and the team are passionate about the hardcore players, but we are always forced to down prioritize it due to all the other things going on. So it's a non-answer, and I'm aware, but we are constantly navigating this, and we take so much input from the community, data, and internal feedback. So where do we begin? I mean, we could start with the Cyberstan comment, his thoughts on the, as he calls it, hardcore players, their confirmation of the push to pump out new content. But, you know, I'd like to go back to this opening where he says there are multiple discussions about improving the existing present items, but they're forced to prioritize the novelty or new content over what we already have. To be fair, we've been hearing these responses about how they'd love to go back and add this or improve on that for what seems like forever. And at this point, over 2 years after the launch of the game, let's just call it like it is. We're not getting these things. Customization, modular mechs, meaningful progression like emblems for our armors, for, say, completing kill challenges, a bestiary, compendium, it's dead, all of it. And the reason why, and it's kind of the next discussion we get from this answer, it's because they are going all in on just the new stuff. which the community has really been talking about for a while now. War bonds instead of galactic war incentives, heavy-hitting weapons in the superstore, and you could also by association throw in there addressing player concerns only when dropping new paid content. Arrowhead has embraced the very thing they used to speak out against, becoming the typical live service game and turning themselves into a microtransaction hell. Between making the new stuff and then trying to make sure the new stuff is up to snuff, because if it weren't, nobody would buy it, cha-ching, that's what is taking up the vast majority of their time. I've got some questions for you here. Remember back when we used to get major orders with tough objectives and rewards like the mechs, heavy machine gun, and quasar cannon for grinding out a victory? Remember when the Superstore first started off with just alternate armor sets and helmets? Remember when Johan himself said you have to earn the right to monetize? And finally, remember when players would swipe their credit cards to purchase a war bond or Superstore with real money, even though they had more than enough super credits saved up just because they loved the freaking hell out of Arrowhead and they wanted to support them? I do, and I'm pretty sure you do as well. But we're at the point now that Arrowhead has burned through that goodwill they built up at launch, where players were giving them money just because they loved the game so damn much. And we've been flung into an alternate reality where up is down, left is right, and the anti-live service game has done a massive 180 and has now started doing the very things they used to stand up against.
The reason why live service is a good thing for the games industry, if done right, is that it is a continuous hobby that evolves and allows players to get more of the games that they love. And if you forget this when making a live service game, I think that it's a... I don't want to say that that's a problem, but it is a problem. I think that it's a problem. I've decided it is a problem. It's a massive problem.
Anyway, sorry, tangent over, and I could probably just keep going on about those first two subjects, but for the sake of this video, let's jump over to this point that Johan makes where they could take a look at improving the systems, but those are for a smaller percentage of players than what is retained in the mid-game. His words. Translation, there's more players that are in the middle ranks of Helldivers than have reached the end game. And I guess it is assumed that we, the players, can't read or understand metrics because according to Helldive.live, the largest percentage of mid-game players is at 8% of the player base, who are apparently here at rank 60 to 70. But with the game currently having only 150 ranks, for the convenience of this, let's just break it into thirds. That's simple, right? Here we go. Ranks 1 through 50, that's third number 1. Ranks 51 through 100, third number 2. And ranks 101 up to 150, that's third number 3. The early game third accounts for 20.5% of the base. Mid-game, this is where Johan says the bulk of the players are, is 37% of this. And end-game, what he says the smaller percentage of users, according to his answer, is actually 42.7%. So what he said here is completely incorrect. Also, and this is just off the top of my head here, but when did weapon customization, progression, a meaningful DSS economy, and all the rest of it become only useful to super experienced players? Personally, I would have loved to be earning rare unlocks for my weapon customization bench while first playing and ranking up in this game. New cosmetics for crossing certain enemy kill counts is not just for end game players. You don't have to be rank 150 with 2,000 plus hours in the game to embrace modular mech systems. Again, this makes absolutely no effing sense, just like the smaller percentage of end-game player statement doesn't as well. Which is where something like this graphic comes in to possibly fill in the gaps. It isn't about the progression systems. It's about the paid content. That's the true Helldivers 2 endgame. And finally, I wanted to circle back around and touch on this statement he makes specifically about Cyberstan and how, with the introduction of the Cyborg faction, 3 new enemies wasn't enough. Now, first off, I see and read a lot of your feedback, and I think I've seen that comment maybe a handful of times. So I'm going to characterize that point of view as pretty fringe. Cyberstan had its issues for sure, but it wasn't down to the enemy types. In fact, I thought our initial landings there were actually pretty freaking awesome. You had the agitators amping up the bot squads, and those George St. Pierre MMA style radicals were actually very well done. Sure, the Vox engine spam could get a little nuts, and they had some technical issues like landing on rooftops and firing through their tracks. But once we as divers found out that smoke essentially immobilized them, you could pretty much keep them at bay. Plus, the environments on Cyberstan and those mega factories were some of the best and most intense combat we've seen inside the game. And I also want to mention this, with surges, when they happened, those things were pretty fire. And I think it's overall pretty crazy we haven't really seen those again. Now, the true issues with Cyberstan and why it ultimately failed were down to things Arrowhead themselves did specifically with enemy spawns, like removing factory and reinforced striders and instead just spamming war striders. There were POIs that we would run into with like 10 to 15 of these things, all stacked literally on top of each other, and once they all started grenade spamming, the performance of the game would just crash. Arrowhead limiting the full scope of the automaton units and then spamming the most annoying version of what they have was an interesting decision, to say the least. And from there, they sealed the fate of that campaign when we started to take on Transcendence, only to start getting bombarded from space a couple hours in with auto lock onto Helldiver players, and that campaign just went in the crapper. So yeah, there were a lot of positives to Cyberstan, but coming out and saying that the studio received feedback that 3 enemies wasn't enough should have never made it through the survey filters and over to the developers, which I think is a point a lot of us out here in the community have been making. Arrowhead is not only receiving the wrong feedback, but then they're latching onto it and making it studio canon, basing future decisions on these faulty fringe ramblings, and it just continually snowballs downhill from there. Moving on to the next quite telling exchange, a question here was raised about why Arrowhead isn't addressing the older, less used items in our armories, and when they are included in these patches, the changes are few and far between. They go on to ask about a few orbitals and also the completely avoided sterilizer, and Johan does respond to this with some very interesting takes here as well. Now, I'm not going to read the entire response, as the first part of his response is interesting enough. Here's what he says. This is a result of too big a game, too many variables, scenarios, and potential outcomes. Really, this is a path we went down in balance before release, where we started balancing weapons not unto a generic core themselves, but also against individual foes. Listen to this next part though. Helldivers, as designed, wasn't supposed to be a balanced game, a la Dota, StarCraft, WoW, etc. It was supposed to be an immersive experience with rules that players get to explore. But to get the game into a fun state, we late decided to balance the game, and this has continued since, and it's now the expectation of the community. The unfortunate truth here is that it's way too complex to balance versus the team size and tools we have. The balance is too complex versus the team size and the tools we have. That's interesting because we've seen other developers respond in the official Helldivers Discord and talk about how balance is a team directive and that a lot of input is given when it comes to that aspect of the game. So it's either too complex and daunting a task or it isn't. And if it is too complex for what Arrowhead can handle, we've seen them turn to outsourcing in the past. Maybe it's a good time to dip into that bucket once again, especially if the studio doesn't have the bandwidth to handle it. This other point he makes really stuck in the back of my mind, and maybe it's just me, but hearing that Helldivers wasn't initially supposed to be a balanced game, but in order to get it into a fun state, they made a late development decision to balance it, got my spidey sense tingling. I mean, if we have issues with the balance now, what must it have been like before they decided to try to balance it? Also, Johan mentions trying to get the game into a fun state, which again begs the same question. How fun was it before, when it was embracing imbalance and asking players to explore the rules of their immersive experience? Again, I could be reading too much into this, but my mind immediately envisions a full-on intergalactic slaughterhouse where we the players are constantly ground to a pulp. Now, we've heard some of Johan's and of course the other Arrowhead developers' interesting takes on their initial vision for this game and their grunt fantasy, but yeah, this sounds like it could have been an overall dreadful gaming experience, and it was actually down to us, the players, that pushed them to make the game fun, which I would also argue allowed the studio and the game to achieve the levels of success it is ultimately seen. We've got another question here that was aimed at asking if we will ever see community-driven events again, like Stratagem rewards, or if everything will now be tailored and built into war bonds, with stratagems being given out without any sort of build-up. Johan's answer, just like his other responses I've touched on, was rather shocking, saying that they are working on giving the game masters more tools for creating an interesting dynamic between the community and what they do, and over the next few years, let that sink in. And yes, I did just say years. We, the players, will have more power in the Galactic War. He also mentions a few items here, like how they want to diversify how the game is played, and also wanting an articulated set of rules between enemy forces and how we engage with those as players. Fellas, I've talked about this. You've seen other creators talk about it. I see your viewer comments all the time. The Galactic War is rigged, and here we are seeing some sort of response that is not happening ASAP, which is absolutely what we need. Instead, our answers are going to be spread over the next few years. I honestly don't know how much more status quo Helldiver players are going to be willing to put up with, where the Galactic War sucks because we're forced to go wherever the major order pushes us to, or risk making zero planetary progress, and those that choose to enjoy the game versus the faction they love to fight against are actually hurting the MO players. Now, we seem to be taking away the larger rewards and incentives and instead pushing them inside paid war bonds. But again, the thing that stood out to me was years. This thing's got months, which is probably why the new medal rewards announcement was made to push players to log in. I suspect the DAUs, or daily active user counts, are down, and they're making a change to the system. Mind you, a system that's been in place for over 2 years in order to keep those player charts looking good. Transmog was also a question, ship modules, and again, in-game progression, to which Johan did say that Transmog and perks has exploded to levels beyond what was intended, and he made it clear it is not a discussion the studio was currently having, so there's something else we can take off the table. Weapon customization was also deemed not as significant in resolving the lack of progression. However, ship modules apparently are the one bright, shining spot in this entire AMA, saying that they have big news in the future, but again, no idea when that will be unveiled. And there's something here about in-game, with Johan again saying that these systems only satisfy a small part of the player base. However, you already saw the graphic, but you know, just for reference, I'll show it up here again. The largest cross-section of the entire HD2 player base is currently sitting in that in-game zone, levels 101 up to 150. But, you know, honestly, you could easily argue that in-game starts after level 25 because everything is unlocked at that point on up. Your boy here also posted a question to this AMA yesterday, which Johan did answer, and to be honest, it's not really much to cover here in the video. Editing Buzz popping in for a quick PSA direct from Johan to you. Did you guys know that you can farm for super credits? What the f? But instead, I want to feature a post by longtime friend and supporter of the channel, Seccedonien, who forwarded a massive and comprehensive Google Doc of all the known issues and items inside the game, and the amount of effort that went into this thing is just insane. Now, just so you can reference it, I'll put a link to it down in the video description and pinned comment. But I wanted to say I did find it odd that Johan seemed surprised by this document, like he didn't know it existed at all, or maybe he didn't understand just how many issues have been discovered by the players inside this game. I think it also highlights the fact that Helldivers has a player base that, if they were consulted, has the ability to diagnose the issues on a faster and far more accurate level than even the studio can. I'm sure I'm leaving out some important points here or there because there's just so much coming in all at once, but yeah, Helldivers and Arrowhead are really doing some odd things right now. And I wanted to say this is a much further reaching topic than just how they're creating problems and then selling us back to solutions. Progression in endgame looks to be dead in the water, as all hands at Arrowhead are prioritizing new paid content. Also, much of our feedback seems to be either completely twisted before it actually reaches the developers' ears, or it's just immediately tossed in the shredder, while they embrace these one-off fringe points of view that reinforce the way they, the studio, want to take the game. I honestly don't know where the game goes from here, and a lot, and I mean a lot, is riding on Tuesday's Warbond release and of course the patch that should arrive alongside it. If Arrowhead screws this thing up, we could absolutely be looking at another epic escalation of freedom type disaster, with the main difference being here that we can actually see this one coming a mile away. But as they say, maybe that's what it's going to take. A catastrophic failure, so that they, the studio, can see that what they are doing is counter to what the majority of their paying customers are wanting, and I think we're going to have an interesting show in just a couple of days. I also want to say I've been around enough games to see all the familiar symptoms of trouble incoming, and HD2, despite the loyalty and resolve of its player base, is showing all those familiar signs of an epic level crash out. But yeah. Please drop any feedback you have in the comment section below and I'll do my best to respond. And remember, since this is a bit of a supercharged topic, let's keep it civil. And I think you know what I'm saying. Remember to hit subscribe and ring the notifications bell to receive my future upload alerts. Please swipe to hype the video. And before I go, I'd like to say thank you to all of our dedicated and hardcore channel members. Until the next one, this is 𝗛𝗲𝗹𝗶𝘀𝗁𝗏𝗃 signing off.